Hi, we're Oxygen Conservation, and this is the Shoe Room Sessions.
Hello, Alex.
Rich, how are we doing?
A little warm. It's very hot in Devon in June at the moment. Can you tell people out there who you are and what you've done and plan on doing?
I am Alex Godfrey, and I've had many roles in natural capital over the last 7 or 8 years since I left my first career, which was finance in London and Europe. But since then, I've done research project developer role in the Bolivian Amazon. I went back into academia to do a policy masters that was around climate policy to understand that sphere. I tried entrepreneurship, co-founded regenerative agriculture startup called New Foundation Farms. They're actually based quite close to here in Devon. I was the co-head of natural capital at Savills PLC, and my most recent jump on the lily pad has been in fund management, driving funds into the nature space.
Every hat. Take us back to the start, Alex. Where did you grow up? What was childhood like, and what are some of those influences that led you to have this eclectic career path?
So I grew up in the home counties in Hertfordshire, in the county town of Hertford. My mum and dad, who play a pivotal role in my life. Dad from teaching me you can do anything you put your mind to, but you have to work really, 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 really hard at it and outwork anyone else. And my mum, who gave me and my younger brother Liam that spark of go and do anything as hard and as fast as you can. So we grew up very much a carefree life of can you climb that tree, now go higher. And that's what we thank mum for, because we've always had that sort of drive to go further, push harder, which meant we grew up racing motocross bikes, doing freestyle skiing. My brother ended up on the Olympic track for highboard diving, and I think that adrenaline surge has always sat with me and my brother and cultivated the men we are today.
What did your folks do career-wise?
Dad was a country house agency, so real estate. So that was my first ever job at university, was going and selling £5 million houses to hedge fund managers and footballers in Hertford, which sort of, I guess, exposed me to that guy's got a nice Ferrari, Dad. What does he do? Oh, he works in the city. What's the city? Well, it's banking, it's finance, it's law. That sounds cool. I want to do that. So, like most good Nat Cappers, I went to my undergrad to do geography, and then...
Where did you go to uni?
Manchester Metropolitan. Didn't enjoy school particularly, probably because I'm quite dyslexic, and didn't really learn how to learn until I did my master's age 30.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because you say that now, people are like, how do you mean that? How was it not noticed or picked up? And I was exactly the same. I didn't click how to learn until sort of ending degree into PhD. It just, school was very different then.
That current paradigm of school system, I think, unless you fit in that narrow siloed bucket of knowledge retention blurt it out onto a paper out, it's not that good.
And a skill set that's largely irrelevant now in the world of AI.
Exactly. And having just become a dad of one and a dad of another very soon, a lot of thinking around that and what holistic education looks like, which leads through to holistic jobs, basically.
Yeah. When so we were chatting downstairs about how much you're enjoying being a dad at the minute and loving that. Do you think that comes from the role your parents played with you? Are you trying to replicate that? Are you trying to better that? You know, how do you think about that?
Yeah, so my dad had quite a hard upbringing. My mum had a very idyllic village life upbringing. My dad moved away from that and saw what good parenting, good family norm looked like, and said, I'm going to do the complete opposite from what I experienced, and become a phenomenal dad on the back of it. Worked really hard to run his own businesses. So we saw that attrition, putting it all on the field, but also was still there for sports day, etc., etc. So I'm really keen, having had that platform and that experience, to build on top of that again and say, okay, so what does the ultimate dad look like whilst doing something that's impact driven in their career and something that you can leave a legacy behind?
Is your dad still around?
Yep.
Yeah. Have you had that conversation where does he know you think he's an awesome dad?
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Glad. And you can play him this as well, so he can hear that too. It's really interesting because what you describe as your dad and mum's dynamic is exactly the same as me and Helen. So my childhood, not the best. Helen's lovely. Her parents were amazing. And I'm trying to kind of put our new version on what she had and aspire in different ways and things. And yeah, we do wear those. We were talking about our mutual friend Ed earlier, and when I asked him about the questions of which of the hats you wear, work, husband, father, which are best, what's your answer to that one?
I stand behind, and I get this from my parents. My wife is my teammate. She came first. She is my number one, and she always will be. Secondary is my children, Bodhi, and whichever one comes in about 5 weeks.
Do you know which model you're getting? No. Okay, nice.
Leaving it to a surprise.
We love doing that because there's very few surprises left anymore, and this is one you can actually have. And we were wrong both times. We thought Emma was a boy, and we were like, right, we're definitely going to have another girl, and then the dude arrived. So yeah, very different.
And I think thirdly, and it's not a negative third, it's a positive third, because I love my job. I absolutely have passion for what I do in natural capital. I cannot put nature down. It consumes a lot of my thoughts, but it's just a job. Your home team should always be number one, in my opinion.
Yeah. Why Manchester?
Clearing.
Best answer ever.
I applied to do marine biology in Southampton and missed the mark by all of the letters.
Excellent.
And a very good teacher of mine sort of grabbed me by the scruff of the neck and said, right, we're going to go through clearing and you're going to end up at a random university. But like any university education, it was transformational. I quit geography after about 3 months, having thought, what on earth am I actually going to do with a geography degree? And went and did business and economics. My favourite, thinking about breadcrumbs of where you end up, my favourite subject within business economics was, of course, business sustainability. And interesting when you start to factor in other risks into business and investments, what that looks like.
Prior to doing the jump of the degree, were you interested in business in a broader sense? Was it just what you'd observed with your dad? Was business in your psyche?
Was reasonably entrepreneurial, did like small jobs around Bishop Stortford, where we moved to from Hertford in terms of car washing businesses and all that. Like always knew how to turn a pound note,
Right.
but then I guess those wings got clipped a little bit by being put into that schooling system, education system, go to the city because it's where you're going to make a lot of money. Interestingly, in reality, whilst I know a lot of very wealthy people in finance, the most successful of my cohort growing up are the guys that started plumbing companies.
There was podcast the other day with the gentleman's name escapes me, but renowned as the godfather of AI. And they said to him, well, what do you advise young people to do now? And he says, be a plumber. The other jobs are going to be irrelevant in the age of AI. Go be a plumber or an electrician. Or...
Yeah. So it was my second year summer of university, and Dad got me to go and work with one of his clients who was working on something called a credit default swap desk at a big Dutch investment bank called Rabobank, which happens to be the largest agricultural bank at the time.
The people in the 20s in the room, when he says credit default swap, do you know what that means?
Absolutely, I don't know.
Oh my word. You're about to find out.
So a credit default swap was one of the synthetic instruments that blew up the world in 2008 and 2009, along with other synthetic financial instruments like CDOs, CDO squares, which are credit default obligations. It was basically an insurance policy on an underlying asset, like a bond, that you could leverage many, 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 many times over to create this sort of financial wizardry.
Where you package up shit debt, and by putting all the shit together, you can sell it and say, oh, it's fine now. And then it all falls apart.
Yeah. So this was 2007. Being on a trading floor was so exciting as a, how old are you? A 20-year-old.
Just sensory overload, right?
Insane. And this is pre-crash. This is full gangbusters finance. It is so exciting. So
do you think I'd have liked that world?
Younger you, maybe. Now we're both a bit more.
Hate it. Yeah. I said similar. I think younger me would have been all over it, but yeah, not now.
Banking in the 80s, 90s was crazy. Banking in the not 20s, 21st to 20th century, 2010s
Yeah.
was when it all started to get regulated and come back. But I sort of joined on the precipice of that craziness.
Was it like a switch? It literally was like mental to...
My career, actually, my first career, which was 10 years in finance, I did rotations in a bank, and they basically said, as a 20-year-old, watching your ability to manage risk, and I think this comes from the adrenaline sports, I'm very much fight or flight when it comes to risk. You're either sending it down the line over a jump, doing a backflip, or that's too dangerous, stop. To be a good trader, you need that risk. You just understand that risk and play in the middle. So a lot of the trading desks said, look, you can have a job at Rabo, but you won't be a very good trader because you don't have that sort of art of striking in the middle. You'll either be all in or all out, and that's not when you make the money. But you have one of the best social skills we've ever come across as a 20-year-old. So let's introduce you to some brokers. Brokers are the people that sit in between Rabobank and Goldman Sachs, or Rabobank and Deutsche Bank, and manage the trade flows for them and manage the risk and manage the liquidity. That's a lot more of an EQ job than it is an IQ job because you're transactional, basically. So I ended up with 3 different offers on the table. One was from a big broker called ICAP to go on their boring government bond desk. Obviously, we were about to roll into the great financial crisis, so they all ended up as mental desks, but it was sort of boring. Then there was a very technical ABS desk, which is asset-backed security, another one of those beautiful synthetic products, which blew my mind a little bit. And then the other one was banks, bonds, and insurers at a boutique broker where it was a small shop.
What does boutique broker mean for people who haven't heard
Boutique is a smaller company, so I think probably 50 guys and girls on the floor. My first boss was a woman called Billy, and she was the best broker I'd ever met. She had the highest EQ of anyone I'd ever met.
That's what made a difference. It was the EQ.
Just the ability to look at a social situation, look at a trading situation, and manage the relationships and then the business that comes from managing those relationships. And I learned so much from her. But it turns out going to the broker side, which was seen as probably a lesser job than a trader from the sort of hierarchy of finance, turned out to be a very good idea when all you're doing as a trader is your bank is losing money because the price of stocks and shares are going down. As a broker, your job is to transact and get them out of these positions and deleverage those balance sheets. So there was a team of 6 of us, and I was just learning the ropes. Like, I don't actually have any kudos in the money we made, but we made something like 24 million in 6 months, just getting the banks out of their positions. And that really set me up for a career. Like, we were that desk that did that. And it meant that at 22, so I'd worked for 18 months or something, I was getting headhunted to run my own desk for another bigger company and made a really good name for myself. So it was scary, but really exciting to be mid-20s with a really big paycheck and flying to Ibiza for lunches on the weekends.
Was there an element of, this is really exciting, shit, I don't know how to actually run a desk? You know, had you picked up enough at that point?
100%.
Yeah.
You are very much learning on the seat of your pants.
Laying the tracks while you're on the train.
Totally. And broking itself versus trading is quite an easy job. You're transactional. You're buying at one price and placing it at the other. But the finesse of how you become really good at the job is creating long-term, deep, trusted relationships with your clients. So I ended up after 10 years with really deep relationships with JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Bank of China, every large financial institution I pretty much covered. And your job is to do a good job every day and over the long term. So you keep those relationships. And I think basically the takeaway from what I now call the empty years, because there was no impact, there was nothing but like craziness, that at the time was really fun. But after 10 years of going to Nobu 3 times a week, it gets exceedingly boring. And I knew I had to change. And the pivot point for me in the empty years that decade was I got hired to run a desk over in Germany, and I had 6 months garden leave, so I love my skiing. So I went out and lived in the Alps, and I lived opposite a girl called Amy, who's now my wife, who we have near enough 2 children with. She was doing her ski instructor training, but she was going to medical school. Fast forward 5 years, I'm completely burnt out in breaking. The alarm goes at 4:30 every day. You are chained to your desk. You're then out all hours of the night and just pushing numbers around, essentially. The fun had totally gone out of it, and Amy's coming home from the hospital saying, I saved a child's life, I did this, and you're like, damn, I definitely need to change. I need to get out of here quickly. So she was very instrumental in that.
What period of I don't like this to out? What time period did that look like?
Far too long, because the first 5 years of my career, which were brilliant, because there was big spreads in the market, so as a broker you could arbitrage quite a lot and make a lot of money. The second 5 years,
like a bookmaker, right? You don't care which way, as long as there's movement across
exactly.
it.
Equity markets got a lot stronger, bond markets tightened, the spreads tightened. It was a lot harder to make any money. I was earning less money than I was as a younger trader and a broker, and that just didn't make any sense.
In terms of the remuneration in that type of world, what proportion of it's contingent on performance?
A hell of a lot.
Yeah. Okay.
A hell of a lot. So I think from those empty years, great relationships, great times in my 20s, but was really left wanting what's next. I need to have more of a growth mindset, start learning again, because this is just boxed in the same thing. And I can either just look at my 45-year-old colleagues and they've got a couple of Ferraris, but they are not happy, or do something different. And that's when Amy said, go and see my uncle Jim. And Jim, James Johnson, is a pivotal man in my life. It's actually my wife's uncle. He studied agriculture at Oxford when they did agriculture at Oxford. He then joined DFID, which is the Department for International Development, over in Latin America. And I landed after he'd been there for 30, 40 years. Sorry, Jim, if I've got that wrong in terms of maths. But he has worked all over Latin America, and you can literally go on Google Maps and see where he has put windbreaks across Argentina, because when Latin America were going through their green revolution and tearing up every tree and destroying all of their land for conventional agriculture, he said, hang on, if you don't have these, what we now call nature-based solutions in place, all of the wind is going to come off of the Andes and blow all of your soil into the Atlantic. So you can literally go on Google Maps and see all of the different NBS things he put in place. We spent the majority of my time whilst I was there in Bolivia on his passion project, which was a syntropic agroforestry project, you call it now. So me, who'd come from a trading desk with loads of screens, to then dumped in the Amazon in 2018, the whole thing's on fire. There's desertified land all around you because it's been deforested and it's basically just dust. And then there's this oasis that used to be dust 50 years ago, and now it's this mature project, and it's a forest. It's alive with people, products, as in farm produce and fibre, biodiversity. It's bloody hot in what's basically the desert, which is the Chaco, because it's been deforested. It's really cool inside the trees. The livestock that you drive past on the way from Santa Cruz to Jim's project are all skeletal because it's 40 degrees and 100% humidity. These are Aberdeen with Angus cows mixed with Criollo. So not only do they produce a premium beef, they're looking great because it's 10 degrees cooler in the forest. So there's also 11 other products that he's taking out of this piece of land. And I'm like, this is just not like farms at home. Is it because it's in a different part of the world? But hang on, over there, they're cutting down forests to grow soy to feed to beef. No, this is conventional agriculture in this country as well. That doesn't feel right. It doesn't look right. All the cows look knackered. In Jim's project, it's large scale. He's taking 12 things out the farm gate. That's creating, so they're moving back into the sort of finance head of this is interesting. It's basically portfolio theory, but at an asset level. So he created short, medium, and long-term cash flows on the land, which is timber's long-term, bananas, coffee, baruca nuts are medium-term, and corn is short-term, let's say. But what it meant is this asset level portfolio theory was resilient. If the cows die because of heat stress or disease, it's only 10% of the incomes from the farm. So I was like, okay, that's really interesting. This is ecologically and economically resilient. And actually, this is the most interesting bit that I was like, okay, there's something really cool here around the climate piece that I just started to think about, because obviously I was looking for impact. Climate was a big issue. In 2018, it was one of the biggest burning events in recent years in the Amazon. And we weren't burning 1 inch. And I was like, Jim, why is this forest not on fire? And he just pointed to the cows and said, they eat all of the combustible material on the floor. So he was running a zero input business. You didn't have to buy any feedstock to feed the cows. The cows would eat the combustible material, because it's not trees that burn in a forest fire. It's the leaf litter on the floor.
When you were searching for that thing that mattered more and you were fed up with a previous lifestyle, why do you think it is we look for that? People always talk about wanting purpose. What do you think it is about us as people that needs that? Because you had it all. Like, you were flying career-wise, more cash than you could spend. Life was great, but that wasn't enough.
Because I think as you get older, it comes down to two things. It comes down to a sense of purpose and impact as you get older, because you want to do something that means something. And I think the other side is, I was really lucky to do a job that I got really lucky to get and worked hard at, and the material shit that you end up buying on the back of it gets really boring really quickly. And I feel really privileged that I got to the position to be able to do that. But once you've done, as I said, £1,000 sushi lunch 50 times, it's really boring. Yeah, I just was like looking for impact. I didn't have kids or any, like, we weren't even thinking about having kids at the time. It was more just,
what I think is mad now is we hear it without fail. We hear it from every intern applicant that they want purpose, and they haven't even had to go through the chores of the £1,000 sushi lunches yet. When we were like going to, no one talked about purpose. It was just how you're going to get a job and get paid. There was no, like, it wasn't a thing, and it
wasn't even, and it still isn't for the majority of people.
Yeah, it probably isn't. Just we're in an
haven't-
echo chamber of smart,
Yeah.
like, emotionally aware and intelligent people. Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is you either organically or you stumble into trying to have a growth, having a growth mindset, and like that endless pursuit of knowledge, new experiences, and constantly growing. I'm yet to meet anyone in this space who doesn't have that same sort of idiom around them, because
They'd be elsewhere if they didn't.
totally, you're still an accountant, you're still a lawyer, you're still working at Goldman Sachs on the trading floor because that's your thing.
Yeah, you're looking down, not up and out.
So what else did Bolivia teach me?
When you were stood in that rainforest, did you're like, I got to do this, something like this?
I cannot tell you how transformational it was. It has entirely changed my life for the direction I will be going until I retire, and probably more some. Seeing the way that land can be managed to deliver myriad outcomes, lots of outcomes that are positive, economically and ecologically. And it has basically, that 6-month block has carried me, one, with the quiet confidence as I've seen what the future of land management looks like. I've worked on it, I've touched it. Also the hope that we can get this right. So we did multiple things. We tried to raise money for the project, which in Bolivia is a difficult thing to raise capital for. We did, from a Canadian hedge fund in the end, and very swiftly lost it about 6 months later because the Bolivian government changed and started a land grab, and the investor got spooked.
Understandably so.
Totally. We engaged with indigenous populations that were, their only option was slash and burn agriculture, and said, look, we have these offtakes agreed with these parties. If you grow these on a long-term contract, we can pay you more than you'll get from slash and burn agriculture. So you could hub and spoke.
Was that in English, or were you working through translators?
So Jim speaks fluent
Okay.
Spanish, and a lot of people, and I speak pidgin Spanish, which I've now forgot most of it, but I can understand what's going on.
Yeah.
So engaging with Indigenous population, which is obviously a big impact piece. So much of the world is stewarded by Indigenous populations and better, but they've been pushed to the brink of this is our only option. So there was a lot of like ahas, but it was very visceral and very fast, and like it was a deep dive into what the future could look like. And then you kind of unwind and get home and be like, okay.
Did you think about staying over there?
I think Amy would have killed me, but I absolutely love traveling. I've traveled Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Panama, Bolivia, a lot of sub-Saharan Africa, quite a bit of Southeast Asia. I absolutely have the traveling bug, and I think it gives you that really, again, that sort of holistic.
Do you feel guilty about the flights?
No, and I'm glad we've gone into this. It's a bit like my mother-in-law, who's also a doctor. We'll advise people not to drink gin and tonics, but we'll have one every evening. The impact we have as people that work in nature, restoration and conservation is way more higher than the negative impact we have from flying and experiencing the world. We also buy offsets as a family and invest in high integrity carbon offsets to put our money where our mouth is, basically, and follow what we're trying to get corporates to do at a corporate level. That said, post-COVID, we stopped going as far and driving a lot more to try and decrease that. So will I still jump on a plane? Yes. Do I have to jump on planes for work to go up to Scotland? Yes. Are we much more conscious of our carbon footprint and monitor it and look at where we can reduce whilst not just sticking local? I think that's where we sit.
Yeah, I think it's. I asked the amazing John Elkington this question, who's been to like 100 countries over his 75 years. And he said, when I look at this hard, I think I can honestly say I've done more good than I've done impact. And that's what we need everyone to do. So.
And I think hopefully we'll get onto it a bit later, but the kind of ideology that sits around climate sometimes, that sort of Greta end of the spectrum, I think it can actually turn a lot of stakeholders off, and we need to shift it more towards this is just core business risk. This is core business. This is better, more profitable way to manage land, manage portfolios, understand risk, understand supply chains. When we start talking in that kind of taxonomy and away from the planet's burning, we have to do something crap, that often turns a lot of the key stakeholders off.
I was interviewed by the FT the other day, and they said, "Oh, can you help us really understand? You know, we're not getting investors being scared enough. Why should they be scared about the climate and nature?" I'm like, stop. They shouldn't be. They should be desperately wanting to get into the opportunity that's there. And she was like, "Oh, no one's ever explained it that way before." And I'm like, how well has yelling at people gone and telling them you must do more, you must do less, you must do this differently, must. Don't preach. Listen, and then communicate about excitement and hope and future and what it can be rather than what it was.
If just on that point, I totally agree with you, Rich. We are in an opportunity point here. If it's as bad as we say it is, stuff will already be happening because New York is underwater, Miami's underwater, California's burning. Oh no, wait, California did burn. That is the stick, but there is a massive carrot here where there is
investment's agnostic.
Yeah.
If it's getting a good return, it will put money in. As a group, as a sector, the environment and natural capital world, we haven't offered a compelling enough proposition for someone to throw billions at it yet.
Yep.
They've invested in everything else.
And I argue that's because, one, the ideological wrapper that's put around it turns people off.
It's scary as well because you know if you invest in that and all of a sudden you're seen on a plane or in a car that you like, you're going to get attacked.
And it shouldn't be that way.
No.
And second to that is the complexity. And coming back to our sort of growth mindset, systems-based thinking, if you're a systems-based thinker, you move out of a silo and you start to look at the system as a whole, a bit like biomimicry. You start thinking like nature. It's a complex web of interconnected problems and solutions and challenges. It all starts to make sense. That's not how we think. We think in silos. So there's added layer of that you have to take investors through that's different to, well, here's a renewable energy proposition, here's the impact, here's the return. Nature's a bit more esoteric. And it's really weird how we've got so disconnected from nature, because we are nature. And from a risk management finance perspective, it makes up 50% of global GDP is directly or moderately linked to nature. And it's a bit like the great financial crisis. It's this kind of hidden beast that not many people know that risk is there. But just because people don't know it's there doesn't mean it's not there.
And just like the financial crisis, there are going to be a small number of incredibly well-rewarded billionaires who do see it and do notice it.
Yep.
And then you'll have that inversion, that inflection point, whereby then it won't be who's the first in at scale. It'll be like, Christ, I can't be the last in at scale, and I've got to rush.
Yeah.
Bring us back from Bolivia, Alex.
So you got back from Bolivia with my mind on fire of, okay, it's land, it's visceral, it's complex, but there is a system that's better than the current one. And there's a lot of land on Earth. And then you start doing your reading and jumping into academia. I actually went and did a policy master's at SOAS, which is the Centre for Oriental and African Studies, which is attached to UCL. Really cool university to go to. Was basically the only white guy with blonde hair and blue eyes there. Everyone is from every inch of the earth. No one did finance. So you then kind of deep dive deeper into more indigenous rights, aspects from the global south. So you get this really holistic view of, this is how I think the world works, but there's so many other different ways. And added to that systems-based thinking, my dissertation was on large-scale agroforestry. Can we grow vertically and horizontally on the same piece of land, and what economic and ecological results does that give? Weirdly, a lot of it came back like, why is it not being done? Because the economics are better. Forestry people and farming people don't love talking to one another, and it's actually one of the blockers is social. They just don't communicate, and yet, as I'd just seen, this system's better.
That's another problem we've got across the natural capital world. So we had Richard Kelly from Foresight on the podcast. I got a load of stick for having a forester on the pod. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, the guy's brilliant. They've done some really interesting stuff. They do things the right. And what I love about Foresight is they're honest about. They're like, no, we're not conservationists.
Yep.
We're foresters, but who do it in a more sustainable way and try and improve what we do. They're wonderfully authentic, super bright. And I was like, you should listen to everyone who's not. I mean, no, in fact, you should listen to everyone, especially if you disagree with them. And I didn't disagree with much of what Rich said. We don't do forestry, not because we're against it. You know, I think we need more UK-grown native timber. We just don't do it because we're not foresters.
Yep.
But it's mad that green-on-green warfare is ridiculous.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Back to the ideology. So I did climate policy masters, dissertation in agroforestry, because I didn't really understand policy.
But for the people out there that recognize some of the dyslexic elements you talked about earlier, how had you learned by this point to make it possible to get your dissertation together and publish your thesis in a way that worked for you?
Good question.
I don't know where they come from sometimes. They just...
Difficulty. But I guess by the time you're 30, you're a lot more competent in understanding you and how you do it, and just taking a lot more time at it, collecting your thoughts a lot more. At 21, I couldn't do that very well.
Just knowing yourself better.
Exactly. Biggest takeaway from my master's was develop systems-based thinking skills, and worked out that policy is, without a doubt, the biggest hammer in the toolbox. When I say that, with a strike of the pen, you can change anything with policy. If you look at COVID as an example of what policy did, we locked the entire world down. But frankly, my takeaway from the policy sphere, and I mean, you've worked for the EA in terms of a public body, it just never really works that way. It's too complex. The policy windows are too short. It's too convoluted.
Consensus on everything, which doesn't exist anymore.
It's just, I would looked at jobs at the UN for about 5 minutes and then went, not a chance. I want to be entrepreneurial. I want to be in private markets, and I want to drive entrepreneurially forward, because I think that is what builds on the foundation of any movement, which is policy. So, for example, in climate, Kyoto and the Paris Agreement are the policy that were put in place that drive forward climate opportunities and climate risk. From that, we've then had TCFD, TNFD with the Environment Act. We've had a litany of policies that are pushing the direction that we want to go, but it's innovative businesses that will actually drive the change.
It's like the policy gives you the chessboard and the pieces, but you still need the businesses to play the game and come up with the creativity and the hardware, software.
So I then jumped in the car to go back to the sort of land and soak in the academia that I'd just done with the experience I've had in Bolivia so what does the UK look like? Like, what does land management and farming look like in the UK? This place looks really green and pretty, but even driving from the Cotswolds where I live down to Devon, when you understand what land management has actually done and modern agriculture, all of the grass is about...
The Yorkshire Dales is the most obvious one for me with that. When you take people there who don't understand the landscape and you're like, that's a wall and a grazed field and a wall. Oh, but it's really beautiful. Just look carefully. What do you see? A wall and a grazed field, a wall and a grazed field, and a shed, and a wall and a grazed field, and an abandoned shed.
Totally denuded.
Yeah.
Totally trashed. And when you understand from an ecological standpoint how trashed it is, it's actually quite scary. Like I always reference to when I'm talking to investors and they say, but hang on, isn't the Amazon the best place to invest? Well, we had our version of the Amazon. We had Atlantic rainforests many years ago. That's now all gone. We're one of the most deforested countries in Europe. They still have some intact forests that need protecting, of course. They are the lungs of the earth. They're really important. But we are in a really bad state in the UK. And two things really came out to me was, wow, this place is in trouble ecologically and economically. UK land management is broken. I'm meeting more and more farmers across dairy, arable, pasture, and they're just all in trouble. But I'm also meeting farmers that are stepping away from the sort of subsidy-based system, doing things a bit differently, I've got these glimmering lights of success. They're producing food for humans rather than for dog food or for
anaerobic digestion,
ultra-processed food, or, this is good, nutrient-dense food. They're disrupting it. They're going directly to the consumer. They might have farm shops. You're in Devon, you've got hundreds of them. Some of them work, some of them don't. But there's a different way to procure food, to eat food, to produce food with less synthetic fertilizers, fungicides, all these expensive inputs that you need in this modern agricultural system that's trashing.
Our wonderful estate on Exmoor, it's a partnership with a 17th generation farming family, which wasn't our model at all. It's just we fell in love with the family and they said, would we partner with them? We bought 2/3 of the farm to allow them to sort out inheritance arrangements and stuff with the family and hand over to the next generation. We gave them, with them, their first profitable year in about 10 by going to organic. The yield was down. Mixed use farm, animals and arable up there. Mixed use farm, yield was way down, but they saved so much on the agronomists and the fertilizer. I always remember being told the anecdote that the agronomists only go to the Caribbean. Whenever you meet your agronomist, they've just been to the Caribbean because they can afford all the expensive holidays because that's where the money flows in farming.
And that word yield, apart from the bond markets, ironically, why don't they look at profitability and gross margin rather than, well, this is how many yields I've been able to rip through the field. Okay, so what was the cost to produce those yields? Just didn't make any sense to me as an outsider that didn't go to Royal Agricultural College, whilst I wear a couple of shuffles now, didn't wear a shuffle. And I was like, this is like so interesting. I've seen something that could be interesting in a different context. Can you grow trees and livestock and crops here? Yes, okay, so it should be applicable here. Are there any examples of it? Yeah, there's some interesting examples that Yo Valley have done. It's possible. So then I was like, okay, so what are my skill sets? What can I do? How can I help impact this industry? And I immediately landed on a white paper by some guys called Mad Ag or Mad Capital over in the US that were looking at financing solutions for farmers that wanted to transition to organic because fundamentally the yields were more secure. Yes, you had that valley of death. But Mad Capital were putting together a £50 million fund to lend to farmers on more flexible terms. A bit like our good friend Tim Coates did with Oxbury Now, Madcap were doing it 5,
Yeah.
6 years ago. So I was like, okay, transition finance, that fits within my skill set. I understand the problem on the ground. I understand finance. I'm going to start a transition finance fund, a la Madcap. And about, I think it was about 6 or 8 weeks into like deep diving, okay, let's set up this business. What do I need to do? I met New Foundation Farms. And New Foundation Farms were a fantastic group of people. As I said, most of them are built, based around here. And their idea was basically what I'd just seen in the Bolivian Amazon. It was, can we buy land in the UK, large-scale degraded arable farms, and take up to 25 different things out of the farm gate?
And timing wise, this was very similar to the start of OC, right? Because I remember hearing the who's the other gentleman that
Mark Drool.
Yes, on a podcast describing this vision and ethos as we were thinking about the sort of concept paper behind OC. So it's very similar alignment.
I was like, I've seen this. They're trying to buy denuded land and take more things out of the farm gate, i.e. more revenue lines, and go directly to the consumer at a more profit. It's complex. It's really complex. You know, you have multiple farming enterprises, but it's not doable. So Marcus in our team spent a long time building a really complex financial model on the back of the Nick's Guide, which is basically commercial farming's Bible of here's the delta of the price of lambs. That's where you can sell a shankat. Here's how much grass you need. So we had everything in a closed loop system modeled on 1,000-hectare farms of how you take 25 things out the farm gate. And it gave you about a 10% IRR, which compared to conventional farming, which is about 1% IRR, I was like, yep, this works. So we went round to private equity, loads of investors, family offices. Everyone loved the idea, but it's quite complex. Can you show us where it's been done before?
Who are the people that see that as a positive? The ones that want to see the one that's before. Where's the capital that says, oh, I haven't seen this before? Where's the ones that get excited about that?
It's the family offices. It's
the US-based firms rather than...
I think it's reasonably regional agnostic. It's charities, it's endowments, it's probably not endowments, it's charities, it's family offices, it's catalytic capital. You know, your Esme Fairburns, like the guys who support Oxygen. We see the opportunity here. We don't need to go through the pension fund due diligence to work out that's there. It's just there's an opportunity. It's a lot more opportunistic.
Yeah.
Where we struck the gong to raise best part of 20 million to buy our first farm from Oxford University, which was Whiteham Farm, was we kept talking about changing the farming system, and there was interest, but people were like, we're not going to invest in this. And that's when I started thinking about, okay, there's a massive increase in climate finance. We're talking about farming finance. What about if we change the narrative and we pivot to start talking about the ecosystem services that were coming from this regenerative farming system? Let's talk about carbon, biodiversity and water. And very quickly, we nearly raised 20 million from ARA, which are a $95 billion REIT over in Singapore. They didn't really care the fact that it was a whizzy farm. What they wanted was the high integrity carbon credits, because I think they'd been burnt in Asia buying credits. And that kind of pivoted my mind away from my passion, which is farming and land management, to investors care about natural capital or carbon credits, biodiversity credits, water credits. So we did 6 months of DD of explaining what we were calling the world's first truly profitable nature-based solution to climate change, because up until then it was buy land, plant trees, cost, carbon credits. Perfect. Well, we're saying we'll give you a farming business that has cash yields coming out of it. It's more complex, but there's something here if you can understand and get behind the complexity, which the investment team did. Unfortunately, 2 weeks before signing heads of terms, ESR took over ARA and scrapped all of their sustainability investments, which is when I picked up the phone to Savills. Savills is a large land manager in the UK. They're the biggest by a significant way. They manage 4.5 million of the 27 million acres that make up the UK. They've been around for, I think, 200
Literally
years.
an institution, yeah.
They are an institution.
Yeah.
They have more foresters, farmers, consultants than anyone else. They buy and sell 80% of land in the UK. And I was approached by 2 of their board members for the UK business, and they said, look, you don't wear a shovel, you didn't go to the Royal Agricultural College. We think natural capital is really important, and more fundamentally, we keep getting asked.
And you'd look great in a shovel.
Thank you. I do. Don't put that in. We keep getting asked this exam question by our clients, like the church, the Crown, large landowners. What the hell is natural capital? How do we get in front of it? How do we capture value from it? Help.
Literally, as this conversation was happening in parallel, I'd been asked to go to a keynote at the Rural Agents Conference for Savills and was ripping the piss out of them for trying to put the wording in their documents, not having a clue what it meant. And it sounded like Google Translate, because they'd throw like carbon, nature, and just smudge it on somewhere.
It was all discombobulated.
Which makes sense. At the same time, they were trying to get you to actually make sense of the world for them.
Yeah. And I think all of the accountancy teams, the legal teams, the agencies, the consultants were all in that kind of like, okay, something big is happening in land management for the first time in 80 odd years since we've gone through the Green Revolution after the World War. Help.
James Farrell at Knight Frank speaks beautifully about this, and he describes that this is the most exciting change in land management and the way of looking at it in his entire career. And that's really what it feels like.
So half the job was educating internally. What does land management of the future look like? Like, we pitched new foundation farms to Savills, and they said that's impossible. That cannot be done. And I said, well, I've just worked on a system just like that, and it can be done. So a lot of it was education and discussion, and the question I always asked my colleagues was, are you confident in the business model that you are running for your clients will be sound for the next 10 years? And it often got met with a bit of stuttering. Something will happen. Government always steps in and helps farmers. You know, it's the way it's always been. Well, as we know from this year, when the government removed subsidies from farming, that's not the case. And this kind of looming risk on the horizon of, guys, do you realise we're heading towards a big train crash, kind of played out whilst I was there.
As someone who comes from a financial background, literally at the beating heart of the financial capital of the world, when you looked from afar and saw and heard about all the subsidies going into the farming system, putting on your finance hat, not your land management one, what does a subsidy mean in a market? If a market needs a subsidy, what would you think and understand that?
So subsidies are used, just moving away from agriculture for the second, because agriculture is a special case because it's quite fundamental to food security.
Yeah.
Arguably, there should always be some sort of safety net, but not the system that we have in place today. Subsidies, and I'll use renewable energy as the example of, in transitionary themes, subsidies are often used to bolster the salience or the investability of it. So for renewables, subsidies sort of built the investment case that then private capital could flow into.
With the theory that once you get to the scale, it becomes more cost effective and cheaper, so then you can drop the subsidy away.
As soon as you hit a 6% inflection point on any market, whether it's renewables or electric cars, the private market capital can start to flow. So subsidies are like that first loss capital. They're like the philanthropic capital. They're like the family offices, and often based by policy. So policy and subsidies go hand in hand.
Yep.
So they're a good thing. Arguably in farming, they've been the worst thing that's happened to farming, because what it's meant is agriculture has very little financial entrepreneurialism, and people just follow the money for subsidies, and that's led to some pretty perverse outcomes. And this isn't just in the UK, this is globally. You know, the US agriculture, Canadian agriculture, Australian agriculture. It's a law of diminishing returns, chasing yields.
Farmers don't recognise a subsidy for what it is. They just view that as income. That's our income that we're owed and paid. And it was perfectly described by you there in that it should be time bound. Like, you don't know how long it should be for, but it shouldn't be forever. And now you may make the exception case in terms of food security or almost like defence. It needs some form of public sector investment. But there is an assumption that a farm doesn't need to be profitable because it's providing food. It just that system is completely broken, and the fact that it cannot function without extensive subsidy, NHS level subsidy, is absolute madness. And the fact that we just go, oh, it's what we've always done. Yeah, but it's never worked. It's madness continuing
And
to
look
keep
at how
doing that.
broken it is, Rich.
Yeah.
We live, if you read your agricultural history, after the Second World War, we were starving. There was a need to put a lot of money behind farmers, tear out every tree and hedge and farm as hard as you can. But the reality of today is we have 5,000 calories for every man, woman and child on the planet. We have the least amount of...
but no farmers, no food, Alex.
We have the least amount of starvation, and we have an obesity crisis, which, as you referenced, the NHS is bearing the brunt of and is on the edge of breaking. Most food we produce is not for humans.
DEFRA's own... there's a chapter in first book that the uncomfortable truth about farming, that 77% of the land in the UK is farmed. Of the food that is produced, a third of it never leaves the farm gates. This is DEFRA's facts, not mine. Never leaves the farm gates because it's not appropriate for what the supermarkets want, or there's no one to pick it because we've made labour laws and choices and Brexit, and that's a whole different podcast. Once the food leaves though and gets to a home, a third of it's wasted in the home because it's too cheap and we buy it and just... So you can give conservation 2/3 of the land and we'd notice no difference whatsoever.
And you can also produce nature positive food on that conservation land. And I think that's hopefully where we'll get to when we get to the end of my very long-winded career, is there is an intersection where nature and food security are one and the same thing. Land sharing versus land sparing, it's always land sharing, because you can produce food for humans on land that's nature positive.
I think pollinators are the biggest sort of example of that, because in the absence of those pollinators, there's no food anyway. Literally, it's I think it's the best one of the best natural capital products that we've never paid for. Imagine if you said to someone, right, your entire product is based on this army of people delivering this service for you. Oh, we don't pay them. We just hope they turn up occasionally.
Yep.
Paid pollination within the next 10 or so years will be a thing.
Totally. Anyway, I digress. Savills, loved it. Really interesting being inside the belly of that beast. I really enjoyed it. Half the job was education, half the job was bringing private capital to Savills, because of the way I saw it, they were the biggest carbon, biodiversity and water project developer in the country. They just didn't know it yet. So it was, can we change to more nature positive farming and advise on that? Can we change and advise on B&G? My co-head, John Dearsley, ran B&G. I was more on carbon, talking to financial institutions to come and invest through Savills. Really enjoyed it. Loved pushing a big stone up a hill. It was good being a corporate disruptor, and it was good to see that change. And I think that stamp still sits there today, which is cool. And then the last chapter up to date was moving into fund management and working for a big name in the fund management space, creating a strategy that allows institutional investors to invest. And that's probably, Rich, where you and I started talking more and more around the valuation point.
Yeah.
Because we talked about how, I mentioned how accountants were catching up, but valuers were as well. And I know you were on a charge of buying a pretty hefty portfolio, some of it through my colleagues at Savills.
Yeah.
But the way we currently value land doesn't really capture through Redbook the value of nature and what it can do and the resilience it can create in the estate. We don't value fertility of land. We have different soil grades, but if you're hammering grade 1 all the way down to grade 4, you're still degrading that asset year on year, and that's just not priced.
I remember asking one of your colleagues, former colleagues at Savills, that exact question. He said, "Oh, that's interesting. What's the annual decay rate you put on the value of the field for the soil you wash away and the fertility gone?" And just silence. That sounds awfully complicated to deal with. Let's forget about that and hold the same price in there. I kind of view the Red Book as valuing Google as if it was the Yellow Pages, or valuing a Mac like a typewriter. It's such a historic, archaic model of valuation that isn't fit for purpose or for the future. But just as the farmers want to protect their way of working, how they've understood the world, even in the face of turning down better alternatives. No, we'll stick with what we've got, thanks. Everyone in the land sector is so accustomed and protective of the Red Book. God forbid we can't change that, otherwise we don't know what we're doing anymore. So when we ran an invitation to partner process to find the people to do the valuation on our portfolio, and you were leading that part of the business for Savills at the time, and we're the only ones. Knight Frank were good too, give them their due. So there was two. It was you and Knight Frank who came forward and said, we can look at this in different, unique ways and consider it in the breadth of it, and we started down that avenue, and then you were poached by the investment fund world, which is a great decision, and that's where you could add better value and be starting to build things, and that is a segue into in that institutional world. What were you hearing from the funds about natural capital, and in the time you spent there, how did their narrative and feeling on it and questions change?
Yeah, sure. I guess the question to answer first is why did I go to fund management away from what was essentially investment advisory? And I think that's because I had decided to create the most amount of impact. You need to be the closest to the capital, to the catalytic capital, to try and push the envelope and get as much money into nature as possible. And advising someone else to then go and speak to their IC, to go and speak to their investors, still felt like quite a long chain.
You're not literally pulling the levers, are you?
So I jumped into fund management with gusto, actually, in the knowledge of we're closer to the capital, closer to telling my story, and closer to telling, creating a strategy that means we could deploy into nature. Our strategy was built around an understanding that institutional investors are really interested in natural capital. And I think before we go into this last chapter, I'll probably define what we or I see as natural capital. There is no official definition of natural capital. If you pick up any AI or book or website and say what is natural capital, they'll normally come back with it's the world's stocks of natural assets, whether that be renewable or non-renewable. So forests, farms, soil, air, biodiversity, etc., etc. So in my book, the next logical sentence after that is that natural capital being degraded, sustained, or regrown? The current paradigm of capitalism is we didn't price nature, we extracted from it, we cut all our forests down, we've trashed our farmland, we've built over loads of it. Like everything is carbon intensive, and it hasn't factored in natural capital. So it's been degenerative natural capitalism.
Yeah.
Then we had the sustainability movement, which has been around for 30 odd years, and frankly, we haven't sustained shit.
No, we missed that in the 80s.
Yep. So we can't sustain. We need to regenerate. We need to rebuild those stocks of natural capital. We need to make that number go back up. So the investment or the land management action that results from that has to regenerate. If it's not, then it's just continuing to degrade that natural capital. And
best just slowing down the rate of decay rather than actually creating stuff.
If you take steps down that degenerative line, you are degrading the asset you're investing in. Therefore, it's a bad investment thesis. So it's all about regeneration. And there's many different ways you can do that. There's afforestation, there's peatland restoration, there's mangrove restoration, there's regenerative farming, which I actually think is the biggest opportunity out of all of them, which ends up in syntropic agroforestry at a global level, funnily enough.
That's totally where you'll get to.
That's the pipe dream. And you have, in the fund management world, you have established asset classes of forestry and agriculture. It's about 150 billion invested across 20, 30 managers. Some very nature negative, some moving towards nature positive and seeing some better results. So I was like, okay, there's some interesting case studies of niche, but is possible. And then there's the other chapter, which is ecosystem services and credits. That's the way you financialize ecosystem services. And that mainly looks like three pillars: carbon, biodiversity, and water. Carbon credits, biodiversity credits, which aren't really a thing yet. We have biodiversity net gain in the UK, which is a compliance market tied to real estate. And then what I think is arguably the biggest, water, is the most nascent, too much, too little, too dirty. I've taken that from Rob Gardner. Thank you. But that is the big one, and it also carbon feels quite esoteric. It's up in the air. Yeah, it's making the planet warm and colder and more adverse.
I think it's the
weather,
most
but-
esoteric one. Yeah, it's the one that's been commodified and codified the quickest.
Yep.
Which I think is fascinating.
Definitely. Whereas water feels a lot more in your face.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
One of the big drivers for me was I've been in 3 different climate disasters in my 36 years. The first was being in Cape Town at day 0 when the city ran out of water. And being in a city, you go from a 5-star hotel and day 1, so you're going to have to shower for no less than 5 minutes. Day 2, so you can only have water out of this bucket. Day 3, so there's no water in the hotel. Day 4, there's no water to drink in the hotel. The supermarkets start to get raided. Within a week, you can end up with a zombie apocalypse style thing. And this is in a reasonably metropolitan city, not even a truly developing city. Second was being in Delhi when we just found out Amy was pregnant with our son, and the air pollution from the burning of agricultural fields is so bad. It's like smoking 50 Marlboro Reds a day. And you're just sitting there like, I've just found out my wife's pregnant with a really precious thing.
Get me out of it.
And what do we do? And people live in this, like millions and millions of people live in this every year. And the last was the forest fires in the Amazon. But like those that think it's a problem of the future, it only takes a few of those events to be in, and you're like, ugh.
It's a pretty good chance we're going to have water issues in the UK this summer.
And the last year with the flooding, I live in the Cotswolds.
Yeah.
There's water everywhere.
Well, the invert this summer, I'd be surprised if we don't end up in drought conditions pretty soon.
We're definitely going to end up in drought.
Yeah.
Sorry, so back to carbon, biodiversity and water. That is the thematic that institutional investors want to know about. They want to be pitched to. They want to understand how we invest in that. But because it is esoteric, because there's not that many examples of carbon credit transactions, even less with biodiversity transactions, and even less with water, it's quite hard to park pension fund money in that when you know you have to give that pension fund money back to their investors. The pension fund investors have a fiduciary responsibility, and that's totally correct. The misalignment of risk around not factoring in nature loss to those portfolios is a different conversation, but just sticking with...
Just on risk, is anyone good at managing risk?
Yeah, Rich. Financial institutions are good at managing risk, but within their silo. Anything that's outside that gets completely missed. And as I said at the beginning of this podcast, nature is moderately or directly linked to half of the world's industry supply chains. You only need to look at cocoa as a index price. It's the highest performing. It's outperformed Nvidia because there is such climate shock to cocoa growers around the world. The price has just skyrocketed because supply has collapsed.
It's really
this
interesting.
is happening now.
I had a deep dive a few weeks ago into everything psychology, system, structure, and process around risk. So I'll pick topics and spend a weekend trying to find everything I can about it and deep diving it. And the 3 examples I was giving of people who really excel in the risk management world were financial institutions, as you say, within their silos and specialisms, professional poker players, and big wave surfers, because the consequences of an error from a big wave surfer are death. Immediate binary in terms of that side of it. So it's really interesting. I think even within the natural capital world, I don't think we've aligned. It's a bit like gearing, right? So you've got financial institutions working in a certain way and are comfortable about stuff. And again, this is a lot of Rob's work about language. But from a risk perspective, I don't think we've given a structure of risk management in the environmental natural capital sector that allows those gears to properly interlink yet.
Yep.
So they're still butting up. Oh no, I can't see that. I can't measure it. I can't feel it. I'm not happy that it aligns with my fiduciary responsibilities. We need to just gently intersect so those cogs come together.
There's a delta between understanding and action. But the thing that keeps me up at night is that risk is still present, even if it hasn't got a number against it.
Yeah.
And it's a bloody big risk as well.
Yeah.
So
What's an example of a bracket of risk like nature that in the financial world you would have looked at? So when it's talked about, what's some kind of risk that would have been well understood and managed and flagged and discussed in the contrary to nature that isn't?
Well, I'll give you the example of the last one that was missed, and that was default risk in mortgage portfolios, which all of these synthetics were built on, and that's why the collapse came.
So while that wasn't on the risk register, what sort of thing would have been at the top? What was always up there?
It depends what industry you're looking at. So say it's real estate, you might be looking at, in this portfolio of flats, how many are rented? And if we get to X number that aren't rented, that will pull a risk red flag. How do we mitigate against that? If it's in equity portfolios, how many company share prices drop to a certain
and they'd consider which of those companies were correlated, or so if we got a drop in these three, we'd expect it in those for, oh no.
That's why you have a portfolio, to spread the risk. But
yeah, like if you only have chocolate bar companies and your cocoa price goes up, you're in a bad way.
But this is the problem, is investors will invest in a real estate portfolio, pretty much all basketed together. They'll invest in an equity portfolio, and yes, you can have some diversification spread against there, but true portfolio theory considers a lot more risk than I think we currently look at, and spreads more risk. It just takes people out of silos.
So we're not a financial institution. We're still a scaling startup, but it's why we've sought to put together a natural capital portfolio in that sense, because we have the underlying land as our base real. You know, if you want to position our portfolio in the dullest way possible, it's a real estate trust. We've got land, we've got buildings, we're there. But above there, we layer on those credits that you're talking about, the natural capital side of things. Then we layer on renewable energy, and then strategic land and the built property, then ecotourism, regenerative agriculture, because then we do start to hedge against some of those things that we talked about.
So that segues actually really nicely, Rich, into what I was trying to create at the fund management company I was at. Was we have a lot of interest from institutional investors into investing into natural capital, but the market was telling us they weren't ready to invest in pure carbon, biodiversity, or water strategies. So we built a strategy that blended the world's oldest asset class in the world, land. There's not making any more of it. We've got pretty good performance figures. In the UK, because we had good policy headwinds with the new farming subsidies, move towards more environmental land management, pretty steady political versus somewhere like Bolivia. Foreground, it's a safe place for nature projects to take off, whereas the global south, where a lot of the car crashes have been, Kariba, etc., a lot of the risks were lower. So we said, okay, we'll go to the global north, let's go to the UK to start. They've got some of the best carbon credits in the world, so we can focus on that as our nature restoration investment. That's our nat cap bit, but let's underpin it with land, homes, and energy. All investors that we're talking to are probably invested into one of those three. They can diligence, they can understand it.
Often two of three.
That will give us a safety blanket that will allow us to get large-scale investment into the nature space, because what we really want is the nature restoration. And when you're buying large Scottish estates, as you guys have found, there's a lot of land for tree planting to create carbon credits, biodiversity credits, and water credits as those markets come online. So it was balancing those two, and that education journey was long, exciting, and tough at the same time with Instees.
What sort of range did you encounter, Alex, in terms of what was the distance between those that were well informed on it and those that nowhere? Did you get the whole spectrum?
So we used to, before every pitch, we used to assess who's in the room, and are we talking to GCSE, A-level, or PhD? And 9 times out of 10, we were at GCSE, which was kind of indignant of how early we are, an indicator of how early we are in the space. And a lot got it. I think leading with land, homes, and energy is you can get comfortable with these, right? These will return about what you'd get from investing in a forestry fund, i.e. something that's taking away from nature. And you get this premium on top for the carbon credits. But it was still really tough, Rich. And I think my summation is the sort of things that you are doing with non-institutional capital and leading from the front and breaking down those barriers is so important, that wave of institutional capital will come as the market, as the proof points come.
You're very kind, thank you. The things that we would hear, and we're not raising. I'm really fortunate position to not have to do that, thanks to the incredible support of Oxygen House and Blue and White Capital. We'll get approaches from institutions, and we'll share what we know and ideas to help try and that education piece do our bit there as well, including the podcast and books and articles and things. What we hear is the scale isn't there yet in the UK, and there aren't the level and the quality, the professionalism of projects we need yet to invest in. Did you hear similar narratives?
Yeah, definitely. On reflection, I think there's a really interesting piece coming back to my agricultural roots, if you can call them that, coming back to that experience. I think there's a reframing away from just carbon, biodiversity and water, and more towards that intersection of holistic estates. So an estate or a large farm will have, a bit like this one that we're sitting in, will have holiday cottages, it will have a B&G opportunity, it will have a farming opportunity, it will have a forestry opportunity, it may have an ecotourism opportunity. Embracing that complexity and building that up, I think, is how we hedge against the risk of just investing in the carbon credit projects and get investors more comfortable. Again, though, one of the big feedback points we had is, we like this, we get it, this makes sense to us. Where do we bucket it from? Because the silo thinking of pension fund investors is, we do infrastructure, we do real estate, we're trying to do natural capital. Like, what are you?
Is there an existing product that has a similar level of complexity? So, we had a piece run on us the other. People like this is the X of Y. This is the Apple of agriculture. We had a piece written on us the other week that we're the Blackstone of the environment. I was like, I'm all right with that.
I'll take that.
Yeah. So, is there an existing basket of assets or products that has the same level of complicity that we're describing in natural capital there? Is there an equivalent already?
No, I don't think there is.
I wonder if that's what makes it difficult for people to perceive it.
Certainly. I mean, I think the most closest adjacent would be the transitionary theme that preceded it, which is renewables.
Yeah,
but renewables is quite simple, right? You put your PVs up or your
and you get one revenue stream from the solar
and you get
field.
one revenue stream. Agriculture does not pay, especially in the UK.
Yeah.
Just carbon credits on their own is too nascent. Just biodiversity on its own is too
property
nascent.
Side of it, they just build the houses out. They're not.
Exactly. It needs to integrate. But through that integration, I think becomes the next iteration of portfolio management and fund management of the future, because you are spreading your risk across different elements that you don't get in a renewable energy portfolio, that you don't get in just a real estate portfolio. And you're factoring in that nature positive piece. It should lead to better economic and better ecological, therefore impact returns. But we're on the precipice of proving it.
It's a really interesting thing about timing. So we had Richard Pears on the podcast recently, who had a 20-year career with Microsoft. And he describes how he was working on, with a separate company, on a VR headset in the early 90s. That it was like the size of a fridge. He was like, this thing wasn't usable, and you got ill using it, like trying. But you look now, in US sport, they're now wheeling that setup out to train high-performing athletes to reduce physical load. You think about when people first started trying to launch mobile phones, they were the size of suitcases, and you had to have a separate battery in a lorry behind you, whereas now we're all living in that way. I wonder when that time period is. All these things are converging. It's going to come. We're going to get that institutional investment there at an incredible scale. But
I think that's the exciting thing, is once you've sort of lifted the curtain and looked under of what resilient businesses look like in the future, and how regenerative economics, like zooming out from regenerative agriculture to, okay, well, what does an economy look like that rebuilds itself and regenerates itself? It feels quite cool to have that knowledge set that there is a better future possible, and there are myriad examples of where that's happening. It's just small and it's not the status quo, which puts us in a great position, those that are in that position, that knowledge set going forward. But it's still, I've been doing this for 7-8 years. If I speak to James Johnson, he's been doing it for 35, been saying, guys, we need to factor in this. But amazing to see how many people get inspired and are moving into the space, both young, old, and my wife, for example, was an NHS anaesthetist. She's just left the NHS to join an impact venture capital company that's investing in food systems, but at a human health level. So what we do to our land and our soil affects, that obesity crisis, because if we're producing highly nutritiously dense food through regenerative agriculture versus commercial, what comes out at the end affects human health. And I think the interconnectedness of it is what more and more people are waking up to, of like, okay, that dot to that dot to that dot to that dot means the system functions better. And because we don't think in systems, there's been so many breakdowns, a la obesity crisis in the US, but globally, but we've got loads of food. That's not a coherent system.
No, not in the slightest. So you're thinking about the next adventure and next chapter in your unbelievable career. What do you think we're going to see in terms of, let's go global with investment. What are the things you would ask them and say to them, and the challenges we should be making of ourselves to have a better impact on the planet?
Totally. So my two predictions for the next 12 months would be, firstly, I think we're going to see the carbon market start to really take off. There's been a litany of large-scale offtakes and a flight to quality.
3 or 4 months of this year, Microsoft bought more voluntary carbon credits than had ever been traded before.
Yep.
Nattergal hit the first £100 a tonne in the UK. And next week at London Climate Week, so this will be released after that, we're going to break the world record for the price again on nature-based credit at £125 a tonne for a PIU.
Yep.
Which is, if we'd have been talking about that 18 months ago, we'd have got laughed at.
Yeah. So I really don't think we're that far off those markets really taking off, and then it will be taking off at scale. And I think the second prediction is the 150 billion that's currently invested in agriculture and timber in a nature negative way will really start to feel more and more of the pain as commodity markets get more fritzed because there's more climate shocks, and there will be more calls within those institutions of how do we build long-term resilience into these portfolios, because we've done our TCFD and our TNFD report and gone, oh my God. So it's the carrot and the stick. The carrot and the stick, Rich, is I'm bullish on both.
Norges Bank, BlackRock have all come out with, look, this is our level of exposure now. We are looking at this. We're understanding this.
There's been that oh shit moment. Now it's driving positive change. So, yeah.
Exciting times. Mate, I'm super excited for what your next chapter is going to be. Each of those, I love how you will arrive in a business, bring your learning from other places, challenge the status quo, but in a way that disrupts without offending. There's real subtlety in terms of how you do that, and has been a feature of what you've done. So what comes next is super, super exciting. Is there one question I haven't asked you wish I had?
If there's one thing you could change with the click of your fingers, what would you do?
And what is it?
I should have thought about the answer before I asked that, shouldn't I?
No, it's more fun when you come up with a question.
I'd make it mandatory for pension funds to invest 1% of their portfolio into nature projects.
I literally had, my answer was, I would make every auto-enrollment, you had to tick a box and say, I want this to be regenerative or not. You had literally, almost like the organ donation. In fact, that's what I do. You've got to opt out. The presumption is it goes into a regenerative unless you say, I don't want it in there. If you list, so we've got some ministers coming on, so let's see if we can persuade them to do that. Alex, you are an absolute superstar. I love our time together. Thank you so much for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Rich. Thanks for having me. Thank you, guys.